Hello. Um, last interview, last chat, Mike was talking about his childhood up to about the age of 16. And in this coming talk that we're about to do, Mike is talking about his experiences first at Marks and Spencer's, then in the National Service, and then his arrival in America. So I hope you enjoy this one. Thank you. We've got you now at the age of 16.
Yeah,
You're working at Marks and Spencer's,
yeah.
yes?
And I'm up in, yeah.
You're up in Hammersmith. You're with your dad during the week. Are you? Is that a pleasant experience being with your
Yes, very
dad?
nice. Yes, I mean, I got on with both my parents very, very well. Um, my father was very bitter because my mother, in a way, had kicked him out. It was basically because she couldn't, they were never happy together. They were a terrible mismatch. She'd married to get away from home, and she adored his mother. She said, I married your father because I just adored his mother. Unfortunately, she died before I was born, so I never met her. He was a good man. He was a kind man. He was quite nice looking, uh, but he'd had no ambition. He was very, um, he had an older brother by about 7 years, maybe more. And they ran a car business in Warren Street. They bought and sold cars. And my father was very concerned that he shouldn't look like a second-hand car dealer. So he was terribly nice to people and very, correct in all his dealings and so forth. And they became a sort of agent for Land Rovers, and they went up market a little bit. But he was totally happy with that. I don't think he was a businessman. He was very generous. He couldn't save. He had, I realize now looking back, an addictive personality because he'd gamble quite a lot. On a Saturday afternoon, he'd sit with the phone in one hand and the radio on, listening to the races and talking to his bookie. If he had money in his pocket, he spent it. He was a very good provider. For, he knew, I don't know why and how, and it's so sad that I never talked to him about any of this, but he knew a lot about meat and cutting meat and good meat and quality. And he was a very good meat and fish cook. He used to go fishing and bring back wonderful fish. He'd make great stews. My mother couldn't cook, or very little. And he was, um, yeah, he liked to drink in the pub. He actually drank too much. And when my mother and he split up, he started drinking very heavily. And and he would eat too fast and then he would sort of run out of money and say, I'm running out of time, I'm running out of time, I'm running out of time. And, sort of, I've got, and he was sort of in a way supportive and reliable, but feckless. It was a very funny combination. He'd do anything for anybody. He would find a way to get things that you couldn't get. And yet he was very modest. And he wanted to be a good person and be liked, I think, and he would do things for anybody. And when people didn't reciprocate, he was terribly bewildered and very hurt, like a big baby. It was a sort of, yeah, he was a dear man. I was very fond of him. I feel, well, both my parents, I feel, with great affection. I understand them now. I
Mm.
think I did then. And what was lovely, they wanted what I wanted. They let me do what I wanted.
Did your dad remarry?
Yes, he did, and so did my mother twice. That's a whole other saga.
Okay, all right, we'll leave
My,
that for
my
now.
father. So anyway, there I was working at M&S, Marks and Spencers, and spending the week in my dad's one-room flat on a camp bed in Notting Hill Gate. And I'd go to the theatre and I'd go to work and I'd go to the theatre and I'd go to work and I'd have sex and go to the theatre and go to work and have sex. And it was all very nice. And I knew, and that the idea was that I would work for M&S, do this apprenticeship, and then I would do my 2 years in the National Service on draft, and then I would come back and pursue a managerial career and build a career for myself. But inside, and I was very dutiful and did what I had to, but inside I knew this wasn't it. I just knew very deeply. So get to 17 or whatever, I have to enlist and so forth. I chose the Navy. And I didn't get into the Navy. And I remember my father saying, it's because he's Jewish, it's because he's Jewish. And anyway, I got into the RAF and went through the basic training. We started off in a place called Padgate in Yorkshire, where you were initiated and you just lay around for a week being given clothes that didn't fit, uniforms that didn't fit you, and going to the NAFI. And then I was sent to, for my square bashing, to a place called Wilmslow in Cheshire. And it was a wonderful late summer autumn day, and we were driving in this coach with our big kit bags through the countryside. And I thought, this is so lovely. And we arrived at this place called Wilmslow, and the voice said, get your ass in out of the bus. And from then on, for the next 6 weeks, it was, being abused, bullied, mocked, insulted. We'd go for long marches or runs, and then we'd come back at 5 o'clock in the pouring rain, starving, and we would just be mocked. If your mothers could see you. All this stuff went on, but it was terribly good, really, and very funny. And now, but we all survived. We didn't say, oh, it's affecting, I'm having mental health problems. We all got on with it. There was something very stoical about British upbringing. You sort of accepted, oh, that's what you do. Okay, you go to public school, you go to boarding school, you're not at home. Okay, you get used to it. You get used to it. Okay. It was interesting. I was secretly rebellious inside about career, but I'm very, very conforming on the outside. So there I was in Wilmslow, and I managed to get 3 days off because of one of the Jewish holidays. And when I got back, they said to me, oh, you've been posted to Singapore. And I said, oh, you're just kidding me. You're just joshing me. But I had, and I was thrilled. Mm-hmm. Now, I had the option of going into the junior training corps, officers training corps, and not just being a plain, airman. But I thought, oh, no, I'd love to go to Singapore. So I did my passing out parade, which has a story to it. The night before, you had to sort of polish your boots and, do all your badges and so forth. You had to burnish them. And I was looking for some extra shoe polish or something. And I ran out in the dark and tripped over something and landed down an incline, banging the back of my head and my whole body. And I remember lying there going, help, help. A lot of other guys came up and picked me up. And I was aching from head to foot, but I thought, I've got to get through this pass-out parade tomorrow, otherwise I'll be here forever. So I actually got through it, and it was fine, and there was no further damage done. So then I was sent to Witham St Anne's, which is just outside Blackpool, to wait for a troopship. And it was always going to be next week, and then next week, and the weeks went on, and on weekends they'd send us home, and I'd get on one of those old British Railways, dusty, dirty, with the separate compartments and no corridors. And it was all gloomy and post-war gloom, and come down to London, spend the weekend, probably with my mother, and then go back for another week where we did nothing but lie around, eat, and wait to be sent somewhere. Then I was sent to Lytham St Anne's on the south coast somewhere. And instead of going on a troopship, I was put on a Hastings plane and flown out to Singapore around Christmas time. So really for 6 to 8 weeks, I was sitting doing nothing outside Liverpool. Oh, when I was at Blackpool, rather. When I was at Blackpool, of course, I went to the Palais de Dance, the big, mecca place, and saw Singing in the Rain, and just thought it was the most wonderful thing I'd ever seen in my life, the movie. Anyway, off I went on this plane, and it took 5 days to get to Singapore. So the first night we stayed in a place called Sidi Bou Said in Tunisia. and you got off the plane, and there were all these camels, and there was a smell of people cooking food with oil, and there were palm trees, and it was very hot. And we stayed in this wonderful place with a sort of, in a, I don't know what you call it, a little garden with a pool, and it was all very beautiful. And the next day we flew to Hispania, which was just outside Baghdad in Iraq, and stayed in tents. And the next day we flew to Karachi, RAF Karachi, which was out of the town, stayed there a night. And all I can remember, the loos were in long rows in the open air, you know. And then, and of course, there were always locals trying to sell you things while you were in all these places. Then we went to RAF Negombo in Ceylon, where the plane had technical troubles, and we stayed in this coconut palm tropical paradise for about 6 days. And I read Somerset Maugham's book called The Summing Up. It was one of his sort of memoirs about his life and writing. And I thought, yes, I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to be. I remember this vividly. And eventually got to Singapore and spent the next 18 months in a place called Changi. No, Seletar, sorry, RAF Seletar in Singapore. And I got a job in, I go to the supply department, checking where things had gone wrong or gone missing, or documents hadn't been done. And they gave me a bike. I was made into a lance, an acting lance corporal, which was very quick for an airman. And so I had a little bit of rank, and we only worked from 8 till 12, I think, because it was incredibly hot. There was a big swimming pool on the base with a place where they had coffees and drinks and things. And most of the afternoons you spent sunning and swimming in the pool with your mates. And then there was a little bus that would take you into Singapore. So I went into Singapore quite a lot. And there was a branch of USIS, United States Information Service. I don't know if they still exist. It was wonderful. You could go in, they had a library. It was, I guess it's what the British consulate does in a way, provides literature and culture. And I used to take books out, American books out, and read. I read Faulkner, I read Hemingway, I read Steinbeck. I just adored all those writers. And they had these huge collections of plays. There was a series of plays by a guy called John Gassner, who was a professor of theatre. He would choose the best plays on Broadway from 1919 to 1924, from 24 to 30, and I read all those plays. I read plays copiously. Now, and I was in this big dormitory, this, what do they call? God, I can't think what things are called anymore. These big, enormous blocks where we all lived.
Yeah.
Okay. Masses of us all on beds. And a guy joined us who had been at RADA for a year, and he was breaking it up to do his national service and going back again. His name was Ian Eels White. And we became very friendly, and I was terribly impressed with him because he was already at RADA, and he had that rather awful, lovey theatre thing that those students picked up at that time, and I was terribly impressed by it. And he dropped names. He was friendly. I mean, he studied in a very good year with Alan Bates and some rather good actors. So, and he managed to join a Singapore amateur theatre company. So I'd go and watch him in performances of English reviews, 10 years later they came out, or they'd do a restoration. And so I went to a bit of theatre there. And then I started reading Chekhov. And I suddenly, at the age of 19, I suddenly had an insight. I read a book by David Magashak, who was a specialist, very well thought about that time on, and wrote lots of books about Chekhov and Russian literature. And it suddenly clicked on me. There was subtext, and things meant more than they meant, and so forth and so on. Now, at the same time, I didn't have a lot of friends, but there was a little group of us who loved films. And we decided to set up a film club on the base. And we somehow got tickets to go to the cinema to review films that were just opening. And I used to write these long, rather pretentious reviews for a little, 2-page magazine. And I started reading books about film theory and film practice. And I discovered very clearly there was something called the director. Now, when I'd gone to the theatre in London, the directors were then called producers. And they didn't seem to have much reputation. They were sort of like traffic cops who handled difficult leading ladies. I did see 3 Peter Brook productions, and I was aware of him actually at the time, and he was working in the West End. Very successful, very young. He was 10 years older than I was, so, and I started to see, there was something called the director, and I got very interested about the fact that where you place people in an image can tell you by their body positions, by the lighting, you can give more information than the text. And I said, that's what I want to be. I want to be a director. And I suppose I thought film director. So I got very focused about that. Now, I'm going to go back again to my teens at 16. While I was working in London and going to the theatre a lot, there are now, I can see in retrospect, 2 or 3 productions in which the acting affected me in a very deep way. And this is quite a serious thing, I realize now, because although on the surface I was attracted to the smartness and the style and the glitz and the performance and all the zhuzh, what really stayed with me were the original production of A Deep Blue Sea with a wonderful actress called Peggy Ashcroft, who you'll know about, who was really amazingly good, very truthful. And I remember being absolutely stunned and shocked and thrilled by this middle-aged, middle-class woman filled with a sort of lust that she couldn't control. Although she was in nice, respectable, sweaters and skirt, two-piece, cardigans and wool things. And there was something, very deep and very shocking and very revealing about her. And that stayed in my memory very, very strongly. Then I saw a Clifford Odets play called The Country Girl, which the stupid English decided to call they couldn't use that title because people would think it's The Country Wife. So it was called Winter Journey. And it's about a famous actor who is now a drunk and his career's on the slide, and about how a young, very energetic a director, gets him back into action. And the young director was Sam Wanamaker, and the actor was Michael Redgrave. And in the first act, it's about an audition. Now, I don't know how much was really improvised, but it was about the director bullying and pushing the director to improvise. And it was electric. I thought, I've never seen anything like this. It was, absolutely extraordinary. And something was clicking inside me. Now, that's the real stuff of theatre, not all this glitz stuff, which I, still loved. Yeah. At that time also, I was reading a lot of Ennui. He was very popular. And again, I liked him because of a mixture of being very sophisticated, but also kind of gutsy, raw. So I had one. So those performances, then there was one more really revelatory thing for me. I saw Laurence Olivier and Vivian Leigh at the Old Vic, which they were running, actually at the New Theatre, or what's now the Noel Coward, in a production of The School for Scandal, which Olivier directed. And for the first, I found classic plays very boring. Shakespeare, so boring, so boring. But suddenly this classic text was so alive and immediate and witty and extraordinary. And there is a scene, which therapy people ought to know, called the screen scene, so in which the wife of Sir Peter Teasdale visits a bachelor. Now, Sir Peter Teasle is an older man, married to a very sort of capricious younger wife. And for various reasons, she goes to visit a guy called Joseph Surface, who she is not having an affair with. And I don't know, I've forgotten why she goes there. While they're there, Sir Peter, Olivier, calls on Joseph Surface, and she is so distressed, she says, "You must hide me." So he puts her behind the screen. And Olivier comes in, is very sort of jokey and laughing, and somehow, something about the screen is there. And he said, and so Joseph Surface says, "Yes, I've got a little milliner behind the screen. She's very embarrassed, so please be tactful." So Joseph is called to the door, and Sir Peter is left alone with the screen and the supposed milliner. And Olivier was wonderful. He thought, "Dare I? Shall I take a peek?" And it was very funny. And he's roguish and going, "Oh, I mightn't, dare I?" And he knocks the screen over, and there's his wife. And that moment, he went from comedy to tragedy in a split second. And you could feel the whole audience go, "Oh!" And it was like his whole life died. And she was caught not knowing what to do. And she was very beautiful on stage, Vivian Leigh. And so that is etched. Now, whether I imposed my own images on those things I saw, but they were deeply implanted, and they taught me something, that a comedy can be more than a comedy and a tragedy can be more than a tragedy, that these definitions are irrelevant, finally, that you're talking about human beings. So those are very important. Because I can talk about them now, and they come back very, very vividly. So anyway, back to Singapore. I'm in Singapore, and I've got this film club, and I'm reading, and I'm thinking, yes, I'm going to go. I want to be a film director. Now, as I was halfway around the world, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to go back the other way via the States? I don't want to go back on a troop ship or even a troop plane. So I spent a lot of time and bureaucratically trying to get permission to be demobbed in Singapore. So first of all, I had to prove to the Singaporean government that I wouldn't be a burden on them. So I saved up all my pay, and then I booked a ticket on a cargo boat, a Norwegian cargo boat with a Chinese crew. Yes, the HHS Silver Herg or something. So that on a certain date, when I could go, I would get on this boat, leave Singapore, and go across the Pacific to Los Angeles, where I might go into the movies, and anyway, carry on with my way home. So that's what I did. So I saved this money and got my ticket and left Singapore, got on this boat, seen off by this rather boy, Ian Ealswhite, who was going back to London, and off I went. It was meant to take a month, this trip. It took about 8 weeks because every time they stopped to pick up cargo, something happened. The cargo wasn't ready. I remember we came into a harbour where there was lots of wood that was stacked up on a sort of jetty. And as we got there, the whole jetty collapsed and all the wood sunk. So I spent like 6 or 7 days wandering around this island, this Filipino island, south of the south. And you walked off the boat, no passports. You just wandered off the boat and wandered around. And, so it was kind of wonderful. I went a lot around the Philippines, and mainly when they picked up most of the cargo. I had a cabin to myself to start with. There were 12 other passengers on it, and they were all vaguely connected with religion. There were a couple of Chinese theology students who were going to America, and we never saw them because they were always seasick, so they were always in their cabin. There was a family. He would be in an English family. He'd been working for some tea company on the way home with his wife, and there were an American Methodist missionary family. And at the first stop, I think it was in Borneo, we just stopped overnight, an Irish priest got on board and shared my cabin. But he got up to pray all the time, and it became impossible. So finally they put him in another cabin. And we used to play cards, and he cheated. So by that time, I was writing a screenplay. I was doing my adaptation of a Tennessee Williams novel called The Roman Spring and Mrs. Stone. And I was also writing a novel called Null and Void. I think I may have copies of both of them somewhere. Very embarrassing now. Anyway, so I got to Los Angeles and Peter Harbor. My mother discovered we had some third relations who lived in LA. And bless their hearts, they said, we'll look after him. He can come and stay with us. And I arrived on Labor Day, America. And nobody had told me my passport had to be valid for at least another 6 months. And it wasn't. So they wouldn't let me off the boat. So I had to stay in the boat for the whole of the weekend. Until some agent could come down, drive me up to Los Angeles, get my passport renewed, and then coming back to the ship and then go through customs. So my poor relatives were standing on the quay waving at me and saying, I'm sorry, I can't come with you because I'm stuck here. Anyway, so I get to Los Angeles and I quite like it there. It's quite nice and it's sunny and the sandwiches are huge and the food's fantastic and it's very moving. You feel you're in a movie. And all the 8 years I eventually stayed in America, I felt I was living in a movie.
I hope you enjoyed that. And if you did, it would be great if you could press the like button. And it would also be fantastic if you subscribed, and if you wanted to get a notification of when the next one was going to be put up, if you just press the bell button, that will alert you. Next episode in Mike's life, he's arrived on the shores of Los Angeles, and his adventures in Los Angeles are our next part. By the way, if you have any questions as these chats evolve and change, please put them down at the bottom and I can look at them. And if there are questions that I can then use to address to Mike, that would be fantastic. And Mike is very happy for us to do some extra videos and to answer your questions. So I hope you enjoyed this one and I hope you come back for the next. Thank you.